Dallas Cowboys quarterback Trey Lance is expected to play a majority of the snaps in the preseason. What does he need to do to warrant a contract extension? All that and more in this episode of the Locked On Cowboys podcast.
You are Locked On Cowboys, your daily Dallas Cowboys podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. With the playoffs over, the sports are stopped sporting like we'd like them to. But this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. I am your host, Marcus Mosher. You can follow me on Twitter at Marcus_Mosher. Joining me today, as always, is Landon McCool. You can follow him on Twitter at McCoolBCB. On today's show, we are answering your Twitter questions, including, could we see more 12 personnel from the Cowboys? What does Ezekiel Elliott need to do to justify his contract? But first, Landon, let's get to this one from Daniel. He wants to know, what would Trey Lance need to accomplish in the preseason to warrant a contract extension from Dallas?
This is a great question because I do think that there are a lot of different angles to this. Obviously, Dak's contract and lack of extension, I think, plays into this a lot as well. So I think that there are kind of two different tracks to this, right? There's a track in which the Cowboys are going to try and use Trey Lance as, very light, but some sort of leverage against Dak Prescott and trying to, use it to negotiate the contract. Or there is also the track in which they are doing this completely in a vacuum outside of the Dak contract, and that they're not trying to use it as some sort of ploy to, say that, oh, we do have another opportunity. I think that the key thing with Trey Lance and kind of him earning his continued spot on this team, we know that this guy's an athlete. We know he can sling the ball around. I mean, I think those are all things that we've seen even when he was playing in San Francisco. I think what I want to see in the preseason specifically is command. The command of the offense, the ability to lead the offense in the field, to make adjustments, and then to kind of be able to look comfortable doing the simple things, right? I don't want to see a guy out there who is still kind of having to process, or kind of get through things. Like a rookie. He's been in the league for a little bit now. He's been in this offense for over a year. And I think in order to kind of hit that threshold for that next contract, like, you need to see a little bit more. You need to see enough that you feel more comfortable that if something happened to Dak, that you could put Trey Lance into the game and feel like he could not only, get you to the finish line, but, be a positive influence on the team. So, the Trey Lance extension is a little bit tricky because of the money that's going to be involved, right? I mean, it's you haven't seen anything enough to kind of warrant a huge extension. You're not going to see anything in the preseason that's necessarily of its own volition enough to give him a bunch of money. So you're still paying for a lot of potential and upside. But I think that, in order to kind of meet the threshold for this contract, you also need to see some improvement. You also need to see him kind of having taken a step, or at least taking you to a spot where you feel like, hey, we're going to pay this guy some money. And I think if you pay him some money, you need to be ready to and comfortable enough with Trey Lance's situation that you're willing to let Cooper Rush go. Because I just don't anticipate a situation when you'll be able to have both of them. So maybe that's the kind of threshold, right? Is Trey Lance needs to play well enough in the preseason that you would feel comfortable not only signing him to an extension, but letting Cooper Rush go and making Trey Lance your full-time number 2 quarterback.
So a couple things. Jordan Love last year, before the I think it was in the offseason, he signed a 1-year, $13.5 million deal with Green Bay, with 13 of it guaranteed. So basically the full contract. I think that's on the table for Trey Lance, right? I mean, that's Jordan Love didn't throw a pass the first 3 years of his career. At least Trey Lance has some experience.
Yeah.
That's probably the deal you're looking at. However, can you give Trey Lance a 1-year, $13 million deal and sign Dak to a $60 million contract? Probably not. I think it would be very hard to do both. And I'm not sure why you would want to do both either. Do you feel the same?
Yeah. I mean, if they re-sign Dak Prescott, it does change a lot of the angles here. And it certainly changes the amount of money that you would necessarily be willing to pay Trey Lance, right? Like,
low-end starter money. Like, that's what, like, Gardner Minshew gets in free agency. That's like what Baker Mayfield got the first time with Tampa Bay. Like, that's low-end starting quarterback money. And I just don't see Dallas giving that out if you just gave Dak Prescott 4 years for $240,
Yeah, I mean, or I would imagine that the Cowboys should try to lowball him and see if they can get a multi-year deal with some, incentives or something to try to like keep him and develop him. But I think that if they re-sign Dak, it kind of puts a little bit of the brakes on a bigger deal for Trey Lance, right? So I would imagine they would still want him because even in a scenario where they sign Dak Prescott, like, we don't know how many years he's interested in. Last time he wasn't interested in a 5-year deal, he was only interested in a 4-year deal. Maybe he's even interested in a lesser timeline. Maybe he's interested in more of a 3-year guaranteed deal. And if that's the case, maybe you're still kind of kicking around the idea of figuring out something with Trey Lance. But yeah, I would say that if Dak Prescott's deal comes down, sooner than later, it probably cools the Trey Lance contract conversations a little bit, simply because you're right. Like, you can't necessarily pay right now, and the way the cap is, $75 million for 2 quarterbacks. I mean, that's really, really tough.
I'm going to go back to the original question from Daniel. What does Lance need to do in the preseason to warrant a contract extension? Nothing. To me, honestly, nothing. I'm getting to the point where I just put almost zero stock in the preseason. I've seen too many quarterbacks come in and look great in the preseason, and then they get to the regular season and look garbage. Kenny Pickett with the Steelers. Perfect 158.3 passer rating, and then was horrendous. To me, it's all about what he's doing in the meetings and then in training camp, because that's just such a bigger sample size than 120 snaps against the vanilla defense, against defenders that have no chance of making the actual NFL roster. So he could look amazing in the preseason and he doesn't get a contract. He could look horrendous in the preseason, but awesome in training camp and awesome in the meetings. And to me, honestly, that would mean more. So it's going to be nice to see him in the preseason. I'm just not putting a lot of stock in his performances there.
Yeah. Production wise, it doesn't, like, I mean, I think that doesn't matter, right? Like, that's why I think the things that I mentioned specifically were about, noticing developmental trends in his play, right? Like noticing command trends, and is he getting better? Is he improving? Those are the kind of things that I think that you should be noticing. But you're right. Like, there isn't like, he could throw for 500 yards and 4 touchdowns against,
Well, Will Greer did that last year. And
exactly.
It doesn't matter, right? Like, that's why I just don't want people to overreact to the preseason too much one way or the other.
Yeah. Again, it's a holistic view, right? Like, the preseason in training camp, it's all, has he played well up in training camp and then taken that to the preseason? That's a positive outcome.
Yes.
That's something to look at. But like, if he's played like crap, he can't, throw a touchdown in practice, and then suddenly comes out and throws for 450 yards against, the 5th team, Raiders defense. I mean, that's not impressive to me. That's not really showing me anything. So yeah, I think you're right in the sense that there isn't like a numeric production threshold that can be met in the preseason. That's like, oh, here's your contract, Mr. Lance. It's more about seeing the constant progression, the stuff that's in the meeting rooms. Is it translating to the field? Do you feel like you can continue to develop this kid beyond where he is to a point where he could be a plus NFL starter someday? If that's the case, that's why you pay an unproven guy $13 million, right? He shows you something that like makes you feel confident that he's going to get where you're hoping to get, and that eventually this deal that you've signed will look like an incredible deal because you've developed a young quarterback. So, but again, that's not going to be shown by throwing a touchdown to Cropper in the fourth quarter in some preseason game. It's going to be about the development throughout preseason, throughout training camp, and then into the preseason game as well.
All right, let's get to more questions, including could the Cowboys use even more 12 personnel this year? We will get to that next. The show is sponsored by BetterHelp. It's really easy to jump on social media and envy other people's lives. Comparison is the thief of joy, and it's really easy to just think that everybody else's life is better because what you see on social media isn't really reality. It might look like they have it all together on their Instagram or on their Facebook page, but in reality, they probably don't. Therapy can help you focus on what you want instead of what others have so that you can start living your best life. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's done entirely online. It's designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. All you have to do is fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist, and you can switch therapists at any time for any reason at no additional charge. Stop comparing and start focusing with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/lockedon today to get 10% off your first month. That is BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast. Are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day? Are you having to turn down the volume because of all that shouting? Make the switch to Locked On Sports today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel program for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all that unnecessary screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or on the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. All right, Landon, this next question comes from @JTG9819. He wants to know, does the lack of a definitive wide receiver 3 make John Stevens and Luke Schoonmaker more valuable and more likely for the Cowboys to use 12 personnel groups?
I think that it is likely that we're going to see more 12 personnel groups. I don't know if it's, look, a lot of targets walked out the door when Gallup and Pollard walked out the door, right? Like, I think it was somewhere in the area of 120 probably targets, receiving targets between the two of them, right? I imagine that simply because of the numbers, if you look at compared to last year, Ferguson had somewhere in the area of 100 plus targets last season. And then I think the next most targeted tight end was Schoonmaker with like less than 20.
Yeah,
so
very many.
I imagine that is going to have a natural uptick anyways, right? Just because I think that Schoonmaker's another year in. I think they're going to want to try to get him involved. I think obviously they liked John Stevens a lot last year, and I think he's going to be a guy that probably will get some schemed up targets near the red zone specifically, right? But there's still a lot of kind of targets to go around that based on what kind of walked out the door. Now, I do think that Tolbert will get a lion's share of those. They like Jalen Tolbert a lot, even if the Cowboys Nation hasn't kind of warmed to him being the true third wide receiver.
Mm-hmm.
But I do imagine, despite all that they will play more 12 personnel. A, because I think that they want to try to run the ball a little bit more and be a little bit more effective running the football. And B, because I think they're feeling a little bit better about their, other targets at the tight end position, right? You've got Hendershot, who's another year away from all that injury stuff. Maybe he'll have a bounce back year. Schoonmaker, I think obviously we have all talked about needing to have a really big bounce back here this year, and there being high hopes for that player. Stevens, like we said, and then obviously Spray Ford is a guy that they brought in undrafted free agency. So I definitely think that we will see an uptick in 12 personnel, but I don't necessarily know that it's like a lack of confidence in the wide receiver core, because I think part of it too is that they're going to want to see Jalen Brooks get targets. I think Turpin's going to get more targets than he did last season. So I don't know that it's like more 12 personnel necessarily at the expense of 11 personnel, or kind of more 12 personnel in the lens of we don't have enough at the wide receiver position, so we're forced to go into 12 personnel. I think that they were trending towards this anyways because of schematic reasons. and that they just have players. It seems like that 11th player on offense is going to rotate a lot more. We're going to see a lot more guys coming in as that guy, whether it's Turpin, Brooks, Tolbert. I just think that the general plan, Lipke, yeah, absolutely. And all joking aside, I do think we're going to see more 21 personnel. We're just going to see more packages, and that 11th offensive player is going to rotate in a lot as just kind of a piece to create mismatches. So. More 12 personnel, but I don't think it's necessarily at the expense or because of a lack of talent at the third wide receiver position.
I don't disagree with anything you said. However, Mike McCarthy loves 11 personnel and he loves 10 personnel, right? Like when his back is against the wall, he likes to put more receivers out on the field. And I think, to be honest, I kind of think Dak likes that as well. I think Dak likes having the field spread and having different options and being able to move players around. I don't think we're going to see a dramatic amount of more of 12 snaps, like increase or anything like that. Could we see those guys maybe get some more targets than usual? Maybe they throw out of 12 a little bit more often than they did last year. Sure. But this is still going to be an 11 team. Like they're going to figure out who this third receiver is. We think it's going to be Jalen Tolbert with maybe Jalen Brooks finding snaps. Maybe it's Kevontae Turpin, just kind of not being a full-time wide receiver 3, but coming in and splitting the snaps with somebody else. I just think I think you can count on Landon like 70 to 75% of the snaps being 11 personnel.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Like this is, I mean, to be clear, this is definitely, like you said, definitely an 11 personnel team. More 12 personnel means that we're going from 15% of the snaps to 18% of the snaps,
which I mean, and maybe it'll be up to even, up to 20 or 22%. Maybe they'll scale back some of the other ones, but I kind of doubt it.
Yeah. And again, I also think that, the idea of having a true kind of 3 wide receivers, like I think that I think McCarthy likes having options in the passing game, in the receiving game. Obviously you have your top 2 guys top 3 really if you're counting Ferguson, and then having that 4th guy kind of be a piece that you can kind of sub in and out and have special packages to get different players opportunities. I think that's likely to be, your true 11th guy. And Tolbert is definitely, Tolbert at this point being the wide receiver 3 on this offense is going to be the guy to get the vast majority of those snaps. I think what's going to be interesting to see is are they subbing Tolbert out for another player because they are trying to get better play, or are they doing it so that they can get opportunities for specialty players like John Stevens Jr. or, Turpin, that sort of thing.
I think if Tolbert or Brooks disappoints in the preseason, I think they'll be in the market for a receiver. Like I could see them going out and getting a Michael Thomas, who's still a free agent, to come in and try to compete for the wide receiver 3 snaps. I could even see somebody like Michael Gallup, who is buried on the Raiders roster, who frankly, I don't think he's going to make the Raiders 53-man roster, coming back on a reduced contract to, be a part-time wide receiver 3 like he was last year. So if things go terribly in the preseason, like, there are going to be receivers available that can fill that spot. But I do agree. Like I think we could just see the targets from 12 personnel go up, not the overall percentage of the snaps.
Yeah. And I think that makes sense with that in regards to what, in the context of what we've heard about this offseason. I think that makes some sense, right? And I also think that throwing the football out of 12 personnel is a very efficient way to throw the football. So
it always has been. I mean, you look at the data over the last 20 years, and throwing out of 12 personnel across the NFL is like the most efficient thing ever. So I fully expect that. All right, let's talk about Ezekiel Elliott and what he needs to do to justify his contract this year. We will get to that next. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Listen, I love sports. There's nothing better than I love than just at the end of a night, sitting on my couch, turning on the TV and watching any kind of sports game. I never want them to stop, but unfortunately with the NHL playoffs over and with the NBA playoffs over, the sports just aren't sportsing like I'd like them to. But FanDuel lets me keep the sports going whenever I want. All I have to do is open the app and dream up bets anytime that I'm in the mood. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. So just head over to FanDuel.com/lockedon and start making the most out of your summer with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast. Every day, just make sure you're checking out the channel on YouTube or downloading the podcast wherever you get your podcasts. We are free and available on all platforms. This final question, Landon, comes from someone named Chuck Diesel, which is a great name.
I like it.
He wants to know, what is a minimum stat line for Ezekiel Elliott in 2024 that would have you saying that it was a good signing? I'm assuming he means both of us and not just me, because that might be a little bit different for everybody. But for you, Landon, what does he need to accomplish for you to be like, you know what, the Cowboys did well here?
Let's be clear. I think that the Cowboys did do well here. Like, I think this is a vet minimum contract with, like, you know, some barely likely to be earned incentives, right? Like, he's not making very much money. And for all the time that we spent talking about the fact that we liked Zeke Elliott, we just didn't like the contract that he was on or didn't like the money he was being paid on. Now we have Zeke Elliott without the money that he's being paid.
He's just a lot older than he was when we were having those conversations back in 2020.
That's okay, because his role is appropriate to what it's supposed to be.
At least we're hoping. That's my. I hope that's the case.
I tend to believe that it is. I'm going to go on the assumption that it is. You know, because and I think it's safe to do that because the Cowboys didn't pay him a bunch of money. He didn't come in and sign some sort of big deal like that seemed to imply that he was the starting running back. Everyone just assumed that because it's Zeke Elliott and he's coming back to the Cowboys, and, you know, the Cowboys needed running back help. But nothing about this deal to me screams that Zeke is the starter or the featured back in this running back group. I think he's going to be a part of a committee. And if that's the case, I'm excited about that aspect, because I think that, and I'll make the point that I've been making about Zeke Elliott his entire career, except now it's going to hit a lot harder because of the contract he's on. Zeke is an absolute glue guy, right? He is a guy who will do anything and everything that is necessary to help this team as a running back. He is a plus pass protector. He is a guy who understands every aspect of football from his position. He's a true leader in the locker room. He's an energy guy. He's all those kind of ancillary things that you want in your backfield that maybe you didn't want to pay $12 million for. Like, that's the issue, right? The performance in the field is, you know, a veteran running back. You're not going to get Zeke Elliott from 2016. You're not going to get, you know, that same sort of player. But I think as a alternate back who you can come in and you can rely on to just not screw up a play, or to, you know, come out and pass protect when you need him to be a counterpunch to Rico and the other guys in the group. If that's what the role is, then I think the Cowboys, you know, will get their money's worth, simply because I think he can do replacement level stuff at running back and then be a positive influence to the rest of the running back room. And if you're telling me that all I have to do is to get that as vet minimum pay, I'm on board with that. You know, I think that there is a force multiplier aspect to Zeke Elliott, especially in this locker room, right, where he has skins on the wall and he has a lot of respect that the Cowboys are going to get out of it. Now, is it worth the $6 million extra additional dollars that we're paying in dead money? No, but that money's already paid. That money's already spent. You know, that's yesterday's mistake. And if you're willing to kind of move past that and give Zeke a fresh slate, I think if he is going to be a very quality second running back who can come in and do exactly what you need and be an absolute leader and an attitude leader in this locker room. And frankly, maybe this offense needed a little bit more of that last season at times. So I think, you know, getting somewhere in the area, if we're talking about stats, you know, 500-600 yards, 4 or 5, 6 touchdowns, I guess, probably, right? And then just being a positive influence in the pass protection game and in the running back room. I think that's good. That's good production for what you've been paying him and what you're asking him to do.
The listener asked about like a specific stat line. I don't have that for you. To me, honestly, it's the role. Like if he can fill the role of 7 to 9 touches a game, effective short yardage runner, effective goal line runner, and convert when they need him to convert, that matters to me. Like that's it. Because if he's averaging 4.5 yards per carry, but not effective anymore as a goal line runner, it's kind of, I don't want to say pointless because that's not true. That's not the reason they're bringing him in. But if he's averaging 3.7 yards per carry, but he's converting all of these short yardage opportunities, he's only gaining 2 yards on a play that he needs to gain 1. That to me is more important, right? So that's where I don't want to get too hung up on the stat line, because I do think there's a world where he could have 550 rushing yards, average 3.5 yards per carry, and still be an effective running back because he's doing the job that the Cowboys are asking him to do. Where I'm nervous, and again, it's not necessarily his fault, but if the Cowboys are asking him to be the bell cow and get 17, 18, 19 touches a game, yes, it'll justify the contract because he's getting all that work, but it's not necessarily good for the Cowboys if he's having to be that running back. So that's where I don't want people to get too hung up on the stat line. I think you'll know it when you see it.
Yeah, I mean, again, I completely agree. It's the role that's important. If he's playing the role that we've laid out, I think he is a high-end, positive plus guy to have in your running back room, right? But if he is going to be treated like he's the bell cow or he's the guy that we're having to feed targets to, we got to get Zeke the ball. If we hear that kind of talk, then not the money may be worth it, but none of our time is worth it. That's the problem, right? Is the role is taking away from other aspects of the offense that need to be featured ahead of Zeke Elliott. That is more concerning. And if that's the case, then we're kind of, sort of back to the issue that we had with Zeke before, except we're just not paying him as much, right? But if you can get him in the role that we just described, like that's what I wanted before he left, right? Is like,
and that's what I wanted, like in 2021 and 2022, is like take the backseat role to Pollard, let Pollard do, have the every game 14, 15, 16 touches, and then just work the goal line, work short yardage, be a good pass blocker when you need him to.
Yeah, and be a leader and a positive veteran influence on a team that sometimes needed that. Those are all things that Zeke is excellent at. Don't feature him at the things that he's not as good at anymore. He's not the guy hurdling guys on the boundary to get a 40-yard run on a screen pass anymore. That's just not who he is anymore, which is fine. What he is still incredibly useful, and it's still incredibly can be used on this offense, but it needs to be in the role that features him in that and doesn't give him a whole bunch of touches in an area where, Rico Dowdle would be much more better suited to get those touches in that situation. I think it's just how he gets deployed is really going to dictate like how useful he is to this team.
All right, that is it for today's show. We want to thank you for making Locked On Cowboys your first listen every single day. Go check out the channel on YouTube. We post videos every day over there. Go download the podcast wherever you get your podcast. You can follow Landon on Twitter at McCoolBCB. I'm at Marcus_Mosher, and we will see you right back here tomorrow.